following African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, they announced the finalization of a $207 million facility. This is to support bank's broader response to measures to the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in financing efforts for the acquisition of COVID-19 vaccines in Africa through the Africa Vaccine Acquisition Trust, that is the Avat. We have international correspondent Femi Akinson. She's here with us now, so let's bring her in. Femi, glad to have you join us. This sounds like a positive thing, for the African continent. Why is having an explicit compensation scheme important at this point in the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you. Good morning to you all. Well, yes, it is quite significant. We are definitely well aware that there's been a concerted trust when it comes to making sure that the acquisition of vaccines or across the African continent has been something that has been made easier through the funds that have been released by bodies like Afreximbank, as well as the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust, which is what we are here to find a bit more about. And yes, your question is quite valid. Why is it at this point in the pandemic that Africans, or it should be that a compensation scheme is what is being announced for now? And I think that still at this point in the pandemic, there are still very many people who haven't had their doses, whether it's the first or second dose of any type of COVID-19 vaccine, not immediately because it hasn't been available to them, but because there's still been a level of distrust. And though the vaccines have continued to show at this point in the pandemic that there has been very little or few cases of any type of negative reaction to them, it is believed that with the implementation of this compensation scheme, should any African have any adverse reaction to the vaccines, well, there would be a clear and dedicated process in order for them to receive compensation. Now, that shouldn't do the opposite in terms of create even more distrust in vaccines. What it should do is allow more people to want to take their vaccines and believe that they would be covered. Should there be any adverse reaction, they would have a clear process in how they can acquire compensation. So it is still very much in its early days. We're only a few hours away from the press conference in which we'll be able to pose a few more questions, understand why compensation at this point is important to the African population, and to find out why it is at this point it's compensation we're talking about and what relationship compensation plays as it pertains to acquiring vaccines and then rolling them out across the African continent. You will be well aware that the World Health Organization has been clear that should the world's population be vaccinated against COVID-19 this year, they would only be able to they'd only be able to vaccinate around 70% of the world's population this year if more countries obviously have access to vaccines. And that's obviously talking about the developing world. Initially, the conversations were about vaccine patent sharing and understanding how other countries could be empowered to create their own. We haven't reached that point yet. So it's still a situation where Afreximbank are laying down the funds through these schemes that would acquire more vaccines and allow more African countries to vaccinate their populations. And it's believed that with the implementation of this compensation scheme, those rollouts will be more successful. More people will be inclined to take their vaccines.
Yes, Adefemi, and as this press conference begins later this morning, and when it's done, you'll definitely be updating us here in Nigeria. But I'm curious, why is this signing happening in Cote d'Ivoire?
Well, thank you. We'll find out for sure closer to the press conference, but I suspect it's a situation that when we look at the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, which happened in 2021 rather, in November over in Durban in South Africa, it was announced that Abidjan would be the next host of the 2023 Intra-Africa Trade Fair. So it's believed that that's why this conversation will be happening here in Abidjan, the Cote d'Ivoire capital. So we will find out a bit more, but I do think it has something to do with the Intra-Africa Trade Fair, the fact that there's going to be an official signing and a handing over to Cote d'Ivoire. and we can understand that there would be a bit more information as it pertains to that. But I definitely think it has something to do with the fact that Abidjan will be the next host of the Inter-Africa Trade Fair. And of course, as you know, Afreximbank and the African Union are formally and definitely well involved. They are the organizers of this signing of this compensation scheme. So it's all happening hand in hand, and it's probably the reason why that we'll be able to confirm off the back of that press conference in a few hours.
Femi, who should we be looking forward to listening to at this press conference this morning?
Well, first and foremost, the president of Afreximbank, thank you, Kenneth. The president of Afreximbank, President Orama, Benedict Orama, is going to be on the ground, as well as representatives from Avat, as well as the African Union. So we can expect that there will be quite senior officials present at this press conference, and it will give us the opportunity to find out, first and foremost, when it comes to compensation, that rings a bell of perhaps a lack of safety or uncertainty, or an insurance method. So naturally people would want to hear why compensation is being talked about. But it is on its face a positive thing, the fact that health is continuing to be taken more seriously as it pertains to Africans and the COVID-19 pandemic. So it'll be interesting to see what information we can get from the people, but definitely we are expecting to speak to the Afrexim president, Benedict Orama, as well as officials and representatives of the African Union, as well as the African Vaccine Acquisition Trust too.
Defemia Kinsoya, our international correspondent, thank you for the great work you're doing there. Quite an interesting development there.